Second Lord, Sroka, Mavosus, cargo, cargo, cargo. Oh, cargo, 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 Iliando, Parcorpo, cargo. First soldier has been assigned the role of bilingual. Boscos, Tromildo, Boscos. Oh, pray, 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 Manca, Rebania, Dolce. Second Lord, Oscorbi, Cultos, Volorca. I love that. Some of my favorite Shakespeare. The punishment is a very fitting one. The victim's name, after all, is Paroles. He has, as his tormentors say of him, a smack of all neighboring languages. And once they have captured him, he exclaims, if there be here German or Dane, Low Dutch, Italian, or French, let him speak to me. His self-imagined mastery of foreign tongues is of a piece with all his other pretensions, which themselves take the form of empty words. And the prize that the soldiers extract from him as a result of their plot is the exposure of his willingness to betray his own people via speech. Oh, let me live, and all the secrets of our camp I'll show. He's, of course, unbeknownst to him, he's talking to his own man. All the secrets of our camp I'll show. Their force, their purposes, nay, I'll speak that which you will wonder at. And at the high point of his torment, he wails, I shall lose my life for want of language. In fact, he is language personified. But it is language viewed in its most unstable light. After all, Tahol means more than word. It is word as in my word is my bond, that is word as promise. So if parole stands for language, he's embodying all the dangers of relying on the notion of signification. The plot hatched by the nonsense-speaking soldiers is explicitly about a language that means nothing, but that appears to mean everything, appears to mean something. Or as their leader expresses it, not to know what we speak one to another, so long as we seem to know. And that, in a sense, is the nature of language, of real language, too. The drama here plays itself out between, on the one hand, language as an arbitrary contract that functions because it is agreed upon, and on the other, a word that claims to be a bond because it isn't a bond. But it isn't a bond. The scenes in Latin, French, and so on were about the fragile transit between languages, whether by ignorance or design. What cuts closer to home for Shakespeare is the fragile transit of language itself. And that may be the deepest trans of all. And in retrospect, looking back at my not so very consequent sequence of vignettes, it may be that for all my self-proclaimed interdisciplinarity, I remain hung up on the word, whether that of Matthew's Gospel, or of the names given to those on the margins of Orthodox sexuality, or that which gets personified in Shakespeare's poem. Thank you very much.
How ready are we to start talking about or structuring our papers around how we feel about what we're studying?
I wish I had an answer to that. I think that there are a couple of, the heart of that problem, the nasty heart of that problem, before we get to the particular case, is the whole question of, indeed, that somehow in the air of this room is, and I suppose in any graduate classroom, is how much should a new doctoral student model himself or herself on the professors that are standing in front of the class. This is a hot potato in so many ways. I mean, I want to get to the intellectual part of it, but I have to pause on this part of it, which is to say, we all, both groups, have to be thinking about that question in all sorts of practical and as well as very intellectual ways. the next layer of that, which often I'm talking about to a group like this, that is sort of less obvious, though it's part of this talk, is the whole question of interdisciplinarity. Before we get to your issue, which is the most interesting one, just the practical question of how early can you become interdisciplinary, and how what is the future? I'm happy to say that disciplines have themselves become more interdisciplinary, and so I don't worry as much about my doctoral students at Princeton who are doing interdisciplinary things as I would have 20 years ago. But so that's the framework, is thinking about the sort of parallax between what your professor is doing and what you're doing, in a model where unstatedly it's supposed to be the same thing. And you're supposed to be just getting more and more sophisticated toward what we do, and then to go beyond it, we hope. Okay, now to your question. And you and I have already talked about it, I'm happy to say. I think, I don't know. I mean, it's very funny. I'm leaving shortly to go to Durham, where I'm giving a talk at a SAMA conference, which is focusing on memoir and asking me to be the scholar who speaks as someone who has written a memoir. And I'm giving a talk called Scholarship in the First Person, Wissenschaft and Narcissism in the Professing of Literature. So it's exactly about that. And that I have felt for years that there's the sort of dirty little secret, but it's a quite wonderful matter, is that we're always speaking as ourselves. And that the pose of Wissenschaft has always to be modulated by the fact of narcissism, the inescapable fact of narcissism. I think, and I think the history of this is that it gets channeled through some decades of identity politics, which didn't do anything for me. That is to say, as scholarship, it certainly brought to light things that wouldn't have otherwise been in the scholarly project, and that's a good thing. But it has sort of, I believe it has run its course, and I believe I'm not sorry about that. So that has somehow isn't the model that I'm imagining. It's interesting, I mean, that my entry into that is, I first did this act of saying, what does it mean to me? Because this is much in the first pages of Seder Square, it's exactly what it's about. Because I was asked to teach a Shakespeare course in Venice as a visiting professor. And so I taught The Merchant of Venice in Venice. And teaching The Merchant of Venice in Venice, not only was there Venice, but there was me, a little bit like Shylock and a little bit like Antonio. I don't need to go into details on that, but you can work it out. In North Carolina tomorrow, I will go into detail, so if you want to join me on the flight, there are worse things I talk about in that talk. So in other words, I did enter through the door in some sense of identity politics. It wouldn't have occurred to me, probably, if there weren't the Jew and the queer thing already in The Merchant of Venice. And if I wasn't sort of, I had this kind of being in Venice had no particular weighty significance, that's where I happened to be, but it sort of inspired a sense that, wait a minute, I'm here, and this is not way out there in the same way it has been when I stand in New Jersey and talk about it. So I think that I don't want to sort of flush identity politics down the toilet in this regard, because I think it's been a very important ticket of entry here. I think I want us all to be philologists and memoirists at the same time.